The intention of this video is not to provide a detailed account of the fighting on Gettysburg's Culps Hill. There are numerous books, articles, and videos that offer comprehensive information to understand the significance of the hill. My interest came from several quotes regarding the topography of Culps Hill. Division Commander General Edward Johnson, in his September 1863 report on the Gettysburg Campaign, notes, "I then advanced my infantry to the assault of the enemy's strong position, a rugged and rocky mountain, heavily timbered and difficult of ascent, a natural fortification, rendered more formidable by deep entrenchments and thick abatis." Captain Thomas R. Buckner of the 44th Virginia recalled, "The works in front of our lines were of a formidable character in some places. They could scarcely be surmounted without scaling ladders." Many other Confederates fighting on the hill mentioned the difficulty of moving towards the northern battle line due to the trees and boulders. Over the last 160 plus years, things have naturally changed. But for the most part, the hill, attacked by Confederate soldiers on the late evening of July 2nd and the morning of July 3rd, remain as it was. My goal is to provide a look at the northern battle line from a southern perspective. With the coming of fall and winter, with most of the foliage gone, we have a more open view of the landscape. I will be providing several maps showing the topographical features of Culps Hill. I will then provide videos and images from the Confederate perspective of the lay of the land and the obstacles encountered during their attacks. I will be using Johnson's division, where 3 of his brigades attack on July 2nd, for locations. Johnson's division was composed of 4 brigades. On the July 2nd assault, only 3 of Johnson's 4 brigades would make the attack on Culps Hill. These brigades are Jones' Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General John M. Jones. Lieutenant Colonel R. H. Duncan would assume command of the brigade upon Jones suffering a severe thigh wound. Nichols' Brigade, commanded by the brigade's senior colonel, Colonel Jesse M. Williams, would be followed by Stewart's Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General George H. Stewart. I will begin with Jones' Brigade, followed by Nichols' Brigades, aka Williams, and end with Stewart's Brigade. When Jones launched his attack, it was getting late in the day. With the setting sun in the western sky and dense foliage, it would be difficult to move infantry as it became darker. Jones also noted the hill was steep, heavily timbered, rocky, and difficult of ascent. If you have ever had the chance to walk the ground covered by Jones' brigade, you will soon understand what Jones was describing. Wanting to understand what Jones meant by steep, I did a little investigating. Using online websites showing the topography of Culps Hill, one could select specific locations on the hill that would provide specific heights. Using this information, I picked an approximate location where Jones' brigade would begin their ascent of the hill. Defining the top of the hill and using some basic math, I determined the slope at approximately 10 degrees. A 10-degree slope, according to Healthline.com, is considered a steep incline and excessive for most people. Keep in mind, this is just an approximate angle of the slope. The hill has many undulations, and the angle of ascent increases near the top of the hill. Add the heat of the day, the equipment being carried, and the fact of being shot at explains the impractical task given to Jones's Virginians. Jones's brigade, as he began their attack, would be dealing with large rocks as well as irregular ground. The closer they moved towards the summit, they would have encountered very large groups of rocks. When standing among these rocks, I was reminded of Captain Thomas R. Buckner's comment that the works in front of our lines were of a formidable character, and in some places they could scarcely be surmounted without scaling ladders. My guess, Buckner, peering through the smoke and with the sounds of battle around him, was seeing these large group of rocks and the surrounding terrain as huge obstacles. All this while Northern soldiers atop the hill unleashed a devastating fire. Lieutenant Colonel Dungan, commanding the 48th Virginia, noted in his after-battle report of July 10th, late in the evening of the 2nd instant, it advanced to the attack in this position and bravely maintained its ground till within about 10 paces of the enemy's works, when, from its reduced numbers and ranks, together with the strength of the enemy and his strong position, I ordered it back about 200 yards. We today will never know if part of Jones' brigade did indeed reach within about 10 paces of the enemy's works. But the Gettysburg battlefield is full of incidents of incredible courage and tenacity. For me, Jones' brigade's attack on Culps Hill on the late afternoon of July 2nd stands among those not receiving the accolades it justly deserves. Just to the south of Jones' brigade would be the brigade of General Francis Nichols, now commanded by Colonel Jesse Williams. Nichols had suffered a serious wound several months earlier at Chancellorsville, and as senior colonel, Williams assumed command of the brigade. Williams' brigade would be deployed between Jones' brigade to his right and Stewart's brigade to his left. Again, using the topographical map, we can see that Williams' brigade would be deployed in the lower ground between the upper and lower hills. This soft, rock-strewn area had little protection for advancing troops. The ground crossed by Nichols/Williams' brigade today is overgrown with foliage and downed trees. Being the ground is lower, runoff from both hills would funnel into the low ground, adding to the growth of the vegetation. I found it interesting the Warren map, created in 1869, shows a small tributary that I believe may be the one found today. Colonel Williams noted in his after-battle report, after crossing Rock Creek, the brigade engaged the enemy near the base of these heights, and having quickly driven his front line into the entrenchments on the crest, continued forward until it reached a line about 100 yards from the enemy's works, when it again engaged him with an almost incessant fire for 4 hours, pending which several attempts to carry the works by assault, being entirely unsupported on the right, were attended with more losses than success. Williams noted of being unsupported on the right would indicate Jones's brigade had failed to hold their position. General Greene noted, our position and the front were covered with a heavy growth of timber, free from undergrowth, with large ledges of rocks projecting above the surface. These rocks and trees offered good cover for marksmen. The surface was very steep to our left, diminishing to a gentle slope on our right. Culps Hill, in reality, is composed of two hills. The upper hill, where the tower now stands, and the lower hill, where General George Stuart's brigade will attack on the evening of July 2nd. The distance between the summits of each is approximately 1,400 feet. Just to the south of Williams' brigade would be the brigade of General George Stuart. This brigade would be the last of Johnson's division to attack Culps Hill on the evening of July 2nd. With General James Longstreet's July 2nd afternoon attack on the southern end of the battlefield, General George Meade will order reinforcements be taken from Culps Hill to shore up the northern line to the south, stripping Culps Hill of northern troops, leaving one brigade, that of General George Greene, to defend the hill. This order by Meade allowed the lower hill to eventually be overrun by Stuart's brigade. Stuart's brigade, during their advance, much like Jones's brigade, would have to contend with the slope of the lower hill. Although this incline was not as severe as the upper hill, the ground cross was irregular and strewn with large rocks and boulders. Lower Culps Hill has a slight plateau towards the north and east that provided some cover during Stuart's advance. The 3rd North Carolina and 1st Maryland Battalion, separated during the advance, would have been slightly north of this plateau, more in line with Williams' advance. This is the view General Greene's battle line would have had, looking towards the lower hill. In the low ground in front of Greene's line is where the 3rd North Carolina and 1st Maryland, now known as the 2nd Maryland CSA, would have been advancing. The 2nd Maryland CSA monument sits atop the lower hill. The area where the Virginians of Stuart's brigade had attacked on the left also faced obstacles of large boulders and irregular ground. The earthworks dug by Northern soldiers on the morning of July 2nd would have also presented some difficulty. With the construction of Slocum Avenue, completed in 1897, much of the ground where a portion of Stuart's brigade would have advanced has been altered. Stuart noted in his after-action report, the left of the brigade now rested very near one line of the enemy's breastworks, which extended up the hill at right angles to the creek and then parallel with it on the summit. The enemy's attention being called more especially to our right, this fortification was not occupied in force. The 23rd Virginia, accordingly, under Lieutenant Colonel Walton, immediately charged the work and scattered the enemy, which was behind it. Darkness, irregular ground, and a hard-fighting Northern brigade positioned behind earthworks prevented the loss of the critical position on Culps Hill. Again, we must remember General Edward Johnson's after-battle report when he noted, "I then advanced my infantry to the assault of the enemy's strong position, a rugged and rocky mountain, heavily timbered and difficult of ascent, a natural fortification rendered most formidable by deep entrenchments and thick abatis." When we see the ground Johnson's 3 Brigade crossed on the evening of July 2nd, and recognize the position of General Greene's brigade line, we can only marvel at the courage of those Southern soldiers on such a forlorn attack. This image, probably recorded in the winter of 1887-1888, gives a glimpse of the ground occupied by General George Greene's brigade with several monuments visible. The tall monument to the left is the 23rd Pennsylvania Infantry Monument, dedicated August 5, 1885. This monument, when erected, was capped with a stack of cannonballs. Rededicated on June 13, 1888, the cannonballs were removed and replaced by a figure of a Zouave, and the monument moved to its current location. Medal of Honor recipient William J. Ray, during the 1888 dedication address, would note, "This granite work of art, just unveiled, a statue of a Bernese Zouave. You will observe the figure represents a youthful soldier who, advancing up the slope at trail arms, grasps his musket impulsively as he suddenly receives the fire of the enemy. It is quite a departure from the dress parade figures usually cut in granite, and while not regulation as to the position of the musket, it is realistic, thus showing the soldier under fire and one more appropriate on a battlefield." To the right of the 23rd Pennsylvania is the 29th Ohio Infantry Monument, dedicated September 14, 1887. The monument depicts a wall tent with canvas folded back, disclosing stacked muskets with canteens, cartridge box, drum, and knapsack, the later bearing the figure 29 in relief. A photograph taken most likely in February of 1887 shows Colonel John B. Batchelder, Gettysburg Battlefield Commissioner, standing, as well as several members of the Ohio Monuments Commission. Ohio's Secretary of State, General James S. Robinson, member of the Ohio Monuments Commission, sits to the right. Robinson commanded the 82nd Ohio at Gettysburg and was severely wounded on July 1st. To the right of the 29th Ohio Monument is a large boulder, easily identified by its odd shape. This boulder is still recognizable now, laying behind the 149th New York Infantry Monument. One of the most interesting items in the images is what appears to be the original earthworks, seen as a small rise in the ground. We have no idea today if they are indeed original earthworks, but they do look suspicious. After walking Culps Hill's terrain from a Confederate perspective, I was amazed with the tenacity and motivation of the Confederate soldiers. Words written by the participants, such as rugged and rocky mountain, difficult of ascent, a natural fortification, tell us what they saw. Although they failed to dislodge the Northern Army from the hill, their courage and doggedness must be admired.